Alright, you clicked on the video, so I'm not going to waste your time. Today, I'm going to lay out why I think that Soul is the best skill in Awakening. That's right, I think Soul is superior to Galeforce.
You serious?
Before I begin, let me lay out a few things. First, this is all my opinion and experience with the game. I'm just some guy on the internet giving my thoughts. If you disagree with my analysis, please let me know in the comments and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Second, I need to lay out the boundaries of the argument. Awakening is a very grind-heavy game that is conducive to min-maxing with DLC or Spot Pass. Therefore, for the purposes of this video, I will be assuming that there will be no DLC grinding. Does this mean paralogs and risen spawns are off the table? Of course not. They're part of the game, but I'm going to assume that, for the sake of the argument, people aren't rolling out with maxed 2020 armies after Chapter 6. This also means that I will not be including DLC skills in my analysis, otherwise Limit Breaker would destroy the competition. Third, this guide is based off Awakening's core gameplay in the hard/lunatic difficulty. This means that my analysis will not be centered around maps like Apothic, since they fundamentally change how the game is played. I will go into greater detail about this later. Alright, let's begin. Before we dive in, we need to look at two things: skill categories and Awakening's mechanical design. Let's start with skills. I have classified all the skills in Awakening into 4 different groups. The first group of skills is called attack modifiers. These are skills that directly affect a player's attack with an outside mechanic not native to normal combat. These include Aether, Ignis, Luna, Astra, Lethality, Vengeance, and of course, Soul. These are skills all achievable at level 5 on a tier 2 class. Additionally, these skills all have a variable chance to activate, revolving around the skill attribute. Although a character can equip multiple attack modifier skills, they can never proc simultaneously. Luna or Soul will never trigger during Astra. The second category is called conditional buffs. These are skills that give some benefit to the user if certain criteria is met. Some examples are Arms Thrift, Vantage, Life Taker, any of the weapon fairs or weapon breakers, and of course, Galeforce. Unlike attack modifiers, conditional buffs can be stacked and used simultaneously with each other or any other skills. For example, a unit could proc Vantage, Luna, and Arms Thrift during the same attack, kill the enemy, and trigger Galeforce. The third category is called static buffs. These are skills that will grant a boon to the user regardless of any criteria. Some of the notable skills include Rightful King, Acrobat, Pass, Hex, and any of the other attribute increasing skills like HP plus 5 or Resistance plus 10. Like conditional buffs, these skills can be stacked in conjunction with each other. I have placed all the pair-up related skills in this category as well, although one could debate that pair-up is a criterion. The fourth and final category encompasses the rally skills. These skills allow the player to utilize their turn to buff their allies, ranging from +4 in a given attribute to +4 in every attribute. The usefulness of rally skills depends on the individual's playstyle as well as difficulty. You may not need rally skills in some random Valm chapter, but they are imperative in harder chapters, such as Priam's Paralog and the harder DLC maps. Now that we have categorized all the skills, let's talk about Awakening's core gameplay. I've split the game into 2 parts, the first half encompassing Gangrel's arc, and the second half including the rest of the game. The first portion of the game is where your units are generally weaker than the enemy, especially on Lunatic. This is due to a multitude of reasons, including lower stats, a lack of meaningful skills, and very few supports. This means that tanking enemies is very dangerous, as it only takes 2 or 3 to kill your units. This means that Awakening's early game is a player phase based game. Enemies are stronger than you, so you must strategize around taking down a single enemy with multiple of your own. This is why player phase based games are perceived to be harder, such as Binding Blade and Conquest. In a player phase based game, your goal is to dish out enough damage to kill the enemy before they can counterattack. This makes offensive skills such as Luna, Astra, and Ignis incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, these skills are unachievable until later in the game when the gameplay has shifted. Past the Gangrel arc, Awakening becomes an enemy phase based game. Your units generally have higher stats than the enemies, influential tier 2 skills are starting to get picked up, and pair up is significantly more impactful thanks to supports. You now do enough damage to kill units on your own, so your goal is not to gang up on the enemies, but to tank hordes of them. When tanking enemies, your chief concern is surviving. You already have the damage. This is the nature of fighting enemies weaker than you. Now that we've laid out skill classifications and Awakening's mechanics, let's talk about offensive and defensive skills. Very generally, if the skill's job is to deal more damage to the enemy, it's offensive. If it's to either reduce your own damage taken or restore health, it is defensive. Now, I can understand that offensive skills can be used defensively, especially when combined with other skills. A classic example is Vantage and Vengeance. Although Vengeance is fundamentally an offensive skill, it has a defensive purpose when paired with a skill like Vantage. Additionally, many skills fall under both categories, such as Patience, a skill that grants hit and avoid. The increased hit rate is inherently offensive, as its purpose is to increase the chance of dealing damage, while the avoid is meant to keep you alive, making it inherently defensive. There are only 2 attack modifier skills in the game that are inherently defensive, Soul and Aether. Soul is obvious, it restores half the damage dealt, meaning triggering the skill does not give a greater chance to kill the enemy, but to keep yourself alive. Aether is special, as it has an offensive and defensive capability. Triggering Soul, then Luna, Aether ensures that the user restores health, then deals extra damage. Although Aether is a superior version of Soul, it has half the trigger rate, making it less reliable when being used as a defensive skill. All of the other skills aim to deal extra damage, something that is not as imperative in an enemy phase-based game. Like I said before, offensive skills can be combined with other skills to make them inherently defensive, but Soul comes as an inherently defensive skill, making it incredibly valuable on its own. Before I touch on Galeforce, let me hammer home that Soul is the best defensive skill in the game. It surpasses other defensive skills such as Pavis and Aegis due to being based on the player's attack. In an enemy phase-based game, your hits typically deal more damage than the enemies, meaning you will recover more health with Soul than you would deflect with something like Aegis or Pavis. Additionally, each skill only protects against half the weapon types, while Soul can trigger with any weapon type. Combine this with the much earlier pickup time, Tier 2 level 5 versus Tier 2 level 15, and Soul outperforms both shield skills. Now, onto Galeforce. Galeforce is an offensive, player phase Tier 2 level 15 skill. Unlike Soul, Galeforce is a conditional buff. If the given unit kills an enemy, the unit gains another action. Now, don't get me wrong, this is incredibly powerful. It essentially gives your unit a free dancer buff since most enemies are far weaker than your units, ensuring that KOing a unit is not too difficult. That being said, it is a purely offensive skill in an enemy phase-based game. You may get the ability to kill another unit, but there are 6 more that will take its place and attack you on the enemy phase. Basically, Galeforce does not aid you during the phase where the majority of combat is occurring. Galeforce is also an extremely expensive skill, as getting a Dark Flyer to level 15 proves more tedious than other classes due to Dark Flyers being innately less tanky, hindering their enemy phase potential. In all my non-DLC runs of Awakening, I typically have to invest extra resources to obtain Galeforce, while Soul is much easier to get. Heroes are naturally good enemy phase units with access to 1-2 range through hand axes, making their EXP progression much more natural. Soul costs 10 less levels on a class that is built to withstand hordes of enemies. Now, do not mistake my criticism for disdain. Galeforce is an incredibly fun and powerful player phase skill that allows you to wipe maps incredibly quickly. Trust me, I've had tons of fun running a Galeforce, Lifetaker, Astra build that absolutely demolishes anything I initiate. But when objectively comparing Soul to Galeforce, Soul is a superior skill due to offering immense defensive capabilities in an enemy phase-based game. While Galeforce allows you to zip around maps, Soul allows you to reliably enemy phase entire route maps. Combine this with a skill like Vantage, and I can assure you that your unit will not die. Well, here are a few closing notes. Many of you may ask, why not build both? Well, that is exactly what I do. In my min-max file, almost all my units have Galeforce and Soul. They work incredibly well together, one offering an offensive benefit while the other keeps my units alive. But if I have to choose which skill to replace, it would be Galeforce. Now, I will say this, Soul does have its weaknesses. Counter is a prime example, as the reflected damage is dished out after the vampiric effect. It's also a skill-based attack modifier, meaning you are never guaranteed a soul proc to regain health the same way Life Taker or Nosferatu guarantees you. Another note, when concerning inheritance, Galeforce is a much more expensive skill that is locked to a female class. Therefore, you should focus on passing down Galeforce over Soul, as many children inherit the mercenary class and can achieve the skill naturally. Although, if you must choose between the two, I would recommend Soul unless the unit has some other defensive capability, such as Vantage with another attack modifier. Finally, I've said this 3 times, but please do not try to run a Soul build in Apothesis. The units in Apothesis are designed to be far stronger than your own, shifting the gameplay back to a player phase. This means that offensive attack modifiers, such as Luna or Astra, are incredibly useful as your units will struggle to deal enough damage to kill enemies normally. I will say that Soul builds still work up towards maps like Rogues and Redeemers. These maps are still fundamentally enemy phase based. Well, there's my opinion. Soul is a superior skill to Galeforce. Like I said, they are both amazing and a ton of fun to use, but I got my preferences. If you don't believe anything I've just said, try running Soul on one of your tankier units on Gruma's back, and tell me how it goes. You would be amazed how well it works. Like I said before, if you disagree with my analysis, please tell me in the comments and I'd be glad to hear your opinion. I'm Aldwin, and I'm out.